Hello, I'm Rob, and today I will look at Highway 413. There was several articles about Highway 413, and I'll focus on a rejection of an environmental assessment from the federal government, which happened in December, just before the Christmas and Hanukkah and other holidays. So I'll look into many of the, at least some of the articles and reports. Let's see, I am looking at news. This first article is from The Pointer, and it's called Federal Government Rejects Calls for Review of Highway 413, Jeopardizing Ontario's Greenbelt and At-Risk Species, by Anushka Yadav. And this is Brampton, Mississauga, and Niagara on December 23rd, 2024. The article has a number of species at risk or endangered species in the photo, such as the red-headed woodpecker, western chorus frog, bobolink, eastern wood pewee, black ash, barn swallow, rabbit's clubtail, rusty patched bumblebee, listed as endangered, bank swallow, threatened, midland painted turtle, eastern musk turtle, special concern, eastern milk snake, wood thrush, red-side dace, and that's an endangered species, Jefferson salamander, endangered, and snapping turtle. And they're all along the Highway 413 proposed extension. And the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, this is from the article, announced the decision to ignore concerns of scientists, advocates, and transit experts and not designate Highway 413 for full federal review. This is despite overwhelming evidence that there is impacts on endangered species, negative impacts on endangered species, threatened species. There's widespread public concern, and there was a previous environmental assessment that indicated that it would not increase transit. It would not decrease commute times in a significant manner. Let's see. I do have. I think that's. Yeah, I'll go to an article page report. I think it's a government document. And yes, so this is the what the response is. It's the Highway 413 project from the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. They're talking about Highway 413, and then it's 59 kilometers in length. There's delegation powers, and then it says that the Minister of Environment and Climate Change may subject to any terms and conditions that the Minister specifies delegate to the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada any powers, duties, or functions that the Minister is authorized to exercise or perform under the Impact Assessment Agency. And then it says that the Minister, Stephen Guilbeault, has delegated the powers under Section 9 of the Impact Assessment Act to the President of the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. And then the decision is I, Terrace Hubbard, President of the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, have decided to not designate the project pursuant to Section 9 of the Impact Assessment Act. And then it says that the information will be available soon. So we'll have to see if that's there. And then there was conclusion that the project may have adverse potential effects within federal jurisdiction, and there was consideration of Indigenous people and treaty rights. But there was a decision not to designate the project, and there was the following reasons. The project must be carried out in compliance with applicable federal and provincial legislative mechanisms. And then the requirements under the following legislative mechanisms and related consultations with potentially impacted Indigenous peoples provide a framework to address the aforementioned potential adverse effects and impacts that the project may cause and concerns related to by Indigenous peoples and members of the public. And the provincial government has a history of minimizing environmental concerns, and they have weakened environmental legislation. But there is federal legislation, including the Fisheries Act, Species at Risk Act, Migratory Birds Convention Act, the Migratory Birds Regulations, the Explosives Act, the Railway Safety Act, and the Canadian Navigable Waters Act. Provincial legislation including Highway 413 Act, Endangered Species Act, Ontario Heritage Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, and Ontario Water Resources Act. There is a joint federal-provincial working group, and they have a memorandum of understanding. So let's see, I'll go back. So this is the Canada-Ontario Memorandum of Understanding. And then it says neither party, Canada nor Ontario, gives up any jurisdiction, right, power, privilege, or prerogative or immunity by virtue of this memorandum. The working group will meet on a regular basis as set out in the terms of reference with a view to address the matters set out in the annex. And working group will oversee the formation and conduct of technical groups made up of individuals with expertise in areas of federal jurisdiction to support the assessment of effects, identification of mitigation measures, and measures to avoid or lessen effects on fish habitat, listed species, and the critical habitat, and or discussions concerning any required authorizations. And then the project is subject to the requirements of the Fisheries Act and the Species at Risk Act. And then it will terminate once the ECCC and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans have made decisions or have reached consensus with the Ministry of Transportation Ontario, Environment Climate Change Canada, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and Ministry of Transportation Ontario. Oh, and it says the Department of Fisheries will review the project for effects to aquatic species at risk and of critical habitat, including red-side dace and silver shinel, while concurrently MTO will engage DFO in early discussions or potential protection provisions under the Ontario's Endangered Species Act. And I think that's all that I highlighted there. So we'll go back to the article. So I'm back at the article from the pointer. So that was the memorandum. They have there was a request for the federal government to step in to review the project, which dated back to 2021. And the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada agreed and halted the project for 3 years as they awaited plans from the Progressive Conservative government for addressing major concerns around species at risk and indigenous rights. But they didn't receive this information, and the provincial and federal government signed a memorandum of understanding to address outstanding concerns. And then in November, 121 scientists wrote a letter to the minister highlighting the absence of federal action. And then those 122 bird species protected under the Migratory Birds Convention Act and fish habitats. More than 100 waterways protected by the Fisheries Act could be impacted by the proposed 400 series highway. And 29 species at risks as well could be negatively impacted. In the notice, I already said that there could be direct adverse impacts within federal jurisdictions, and there was acknowledgement that there could be potential harm. And then there was, from the article, placing responsibility for following existing environmental legislation into the hands of Ontario government is concerning given the Progressive Conservatives' track record of failing to enforce these laws. This is evidenced by the Ontario Auditor General from 2021 reports that found the Conservatives routinely failed to enforce legislation designed to protect species at risk, and the government decision making was actively harming wildlife meant to be protected by law. And then those from this article, the 2021 audit found that the province does not perform inspections to ensure contractors and developers are implementing the mitigation measures required by those laws to protect species at risk. And then although in December, there was another Auditor General's report which found that the government is disregarding its obligations under the Environmental Bill of Rights, often completely failing to consult with residents or disregarding their feedback around environmental legislative changes. And that's been a repeated pattern over the years from governments of Ontario. And then Environmental Defence has released several reports detailing significant environmental risk posed by the highway. And then those specifically Humber River, Etobicoke Creek, and Credit River, which are habitats for red-side dace, which is a species of minnow. And then this article says Environmental Defence is reviewing this decision for legal recourse and exploring potential next steps in order to intervene. And Environmental Defence research reveals that the construction of Highway 413 could generate more than 17 million additional tons of carbon dioxide emissions by 2050. And the article says it undermines Canada's commitment to achieving net zero emissions. Which for the federal government, that's not good, because they've made public commitments to reduce greenhouse gases, and we should reduce greenhouse gases to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And this is going to make it even more challenging to reduce greenhouse gas emissions if they're adding millions of greenhouse gases from vehicles traveling on this road. Those concept known as induced demand. And then those in the Bradford bypass, there was a decision to not intervene as well. And then in terms of like elections, there's people that would vote for the Liberal Party, but they're less likely to do vote for them if they are seen to support the highway. And then it's going to be a election issue. And people should raise it with their MPs and MPPs. So that's that article. And then I have other articles from previous. So this article is called More Than 100 Scientists Join Fight to Stop Highway 413, Call on Ottawa to Intervene. And it's by the same author and the pointer. And it was made in December 8th, 2024. And it said that those 65% of the remaining habitat for endangered red-side dace, all in the Credit and Humber River. Failure to protect these species could lead to meaningful reductions in the chances of long-term survival and recovery of these species at risk in Canada. And then there was criticism of Bill 212, which allows highway construction to begin immediately in certain areas even before authorizations under other provincial acts such as the Endangered Species Act have been issued or Indigenous consultations have occurred, which is outrageous that the government is moving ahead before they get permission from other governments or other ministries. They're not considering the environment at all with this decision, and if they make and environmental assessments, those alternatives that are considered so that the best decision can be made. It's not just about the environment, it's about social, economic, and environmental considerations. So they're not necessarily doing the best route that they could make, and the best route might be no route at all. And then the Act gives power to disclose less information about the project, but also greenlight 24-hour construction on the highways, which could significantly harm migrating birds and nocturnal species, and make it more difficult for landowners along the route to oppose it. And yeah, so that's disappointing. Let's see, I will go to another news item. This one is by the Pointer as well. It's called Ottawa will scrutinize GTA West Highway Plan, citing concerns about at-risk wildlife. And this is in May 2021. So they already identified that there is concerns about at-risk wildlife. So the government knows about this. I think May 2021 there was I think that was around the same time that there was an election provincially. So they might have done it for political reasons as well. So at one point there was a designation for the project to qualify for federal assessment, but that isn't happening now. And then it said, if the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada is satisfied with the measures the proposers, control over the project could be returned. If its solution is found wanting, a full review could take place. Then the article says that... I think this is a different author. Oh, it's by Joel Wittenbell and Isaac Callahan. I forgot to say that. And then the article says that a previous government, Ontario Liberals, in 2018, found that it would deliver minimal communal benefits and risk significant negative environmental impacts. So it doesn't make sense for the Conservatives to bring back this highway. It seems like it's a highway for show. it says that it's clear that the IAAC did not do its own initial review, and now after all this has been done, with the input of outside expert stakeholder groups and thousands of local residents, the agency has decided it will have to get involved, but now it is no longer getting involved. And then those 29 species are at risk or endangered, threatened or of special concerns that have been spotted along the highway's route in the last 6 months. 21 of them in the areas were proposed interchanges. And then there was 3 species in particular: the western coarse frog, the red-headed woodpecker, and the Rapids club-tailed dragonfly, and concerns around the destructions of the habitat, noting that there is concern the project would be unable to mitigate adverse effects on these species at risk, or the species are not adequately protected under provincial legislation. And under Ontario's recently weakened Endangered Species Act, which was awarded by the Conservatives, they approved the route for Highway 413, and then infrastructure is exempt from any requirements to preserve habitat. And then Minister Wilkinson was rooted in the impacts that the Highway 413 would have on federal at-risk species, and while that's important, it's not enough for us to feel like the government truly understands the importance of shifting away from codependency and environmentally destructive projects to protect our futures. So that was that article. So it seems like the federal government is doing an about-face on this project, the highway, and then I will go to the next article. I think that. Yeah. So this is a report from Environmental Defense. It's a lengthy report, 22 pages, sent on October 21st, and it's about the request for designation under Section 9 of the Impact Assessment Act. And then they pointed out that the project would be exempt from provincial environmental assessment. And then they point out that the legislation says that the Minister of Environment and Climate Change may that the project 413 project may cause adverse effects for inland species, and pointed to Section 91(12) of the Constitution Act 1867 for the federal jurisdiction which underlined the Endangered Species Act and Migratory Birds Act, Convention Act, for navigation and shipping, and Indigenous Nations and treaties rights. And then it says that 413 would destroy one of the most significant remaining rural area within an ecological region and watershed where most other land has been urbanized. It would also cut a swath through areas protected under the Greenbelt Plan. it would directly destroy a combined 5.95 kilometer length of forest, which support many sensitive forest birds species and other wildlife plants. And then over 1,000 hectares of land identified as important for local wildlife movement, some of which is also important at regional scale, would either be directly removed or directly intersected by the proposed highway. And then this letter talks about cumulative impacts of sprawl and climate change, cumulative effects with other highway proposals along the same natural corridors, and then there was 129 watercourses in the same region, and then they give an example, like the regions of York, City of Vaughan, and Town of Caledon expanded the settlement and employment area boundaries in the vicinity of the 400 highways, including the 413 corridor. And then there's been no examination of the cumulative effects of the development. Public concern is huge. And then there's like Section 9.2 of the Amended Impact Assessment Act prescribes public concerns related to adverse effects within federal jurisdiction as a central factor to be considered by the minister. And the project was halted, and the proponent hired an advisory panel to advise on alternatives. During the first provincial review process. And the panel recommended against the project. The municipality of Halton Hills, which is along the route, passed a resolution opposing the highway. So, like, multiple municipalities along the proposed highway don't support this project. The city of Brampton has unanimously endorsed a local boulevard option instead through its portion of the corridor route through Heritage Heights. However, there was no consideration of alternatives. And the city of Orangeville passed a motion opposing the project. The Toronto Region Conservation Authority. Conservation authorities have been weakened themselves. And this letter says, which is normally the regulatory authority for developments in floodplains, wetlands, and valley lands, has objected to the potential impact of the highway and the proposed streamlined regulatory projects for early works. Adverse effects cannot be adversely managed through existing legislative or regulatory mechanisms. Foregoing a federal designation on such a basis would also unreasonable, as here the provincial process in question does not reliably prioritize the same considerations or produce the same outcomes as a federal process. They're not equivalent as much as the provincial government claims. And then the letter says provincial regulatory process is grossly inadequate, and it's also getting worse. They say until 2020, the strategic planning of highways was subject to full environmental assessment, but the site-specific impacts of individual projects are not fully assessed. And then 413 highway proposal was subject to an EA process that was heavily criticized on a need and alternatives by the proponent's own advisory panel. And it was terminated in 2015. Ontario government proposes to exempt the project from completing an environmental assessment. And then there was a heading, proposed exemption from provincial EA. In January 2020, the Ontario government proposed to exempt the GTA West Highway from completing its environmental assessment before commencing what are referred to as early works, which were not defined. And there's unclarity how natural heritage features, including fish and migratory bird habitat, would be identified. There's been no communication with the Federal Department of Fisheries and Ocean regarding potential fish habitat destruction, and TLCA has expressed concerns with this exemption, noting that in its view the usual environmental development permit requirement for floodplains under Section 28 of the Conservation Authority Act does not apply to the proponent, and the proposed exemption would fail to protect natural heritage features. The MTO is exempt from the regulatory requirements of the CA Act, and then there's no mechanism in place for the protection of life and property or management of natural resources at the detailed design stage of the highway. So that is very concerning. And then the letter says that there will be unavoidable and permanent impacts to the existing natural heritage system in Humble River and Etobicoke Creek. And then the Credit Valley has similar concerns. There's no draft regulation for public consultation. And then other provincial regulatory processes are inadequate according to this letter. The Ontario Endangered Species Act, it says, doesn't adequately protect species at risk from the project. OREG 242/08, the laying down of highways and activities authorized under the cost environmental assessment for provincial transportation facilities are exempt from the prohibition under Section 9 and 10 of the Act pursuant to Section 23(1) of the regulation. And then it says that the Act might exempt the highway from permitting requirements under the Endangered Species Act. And then it applies to Section 9 and 10 of the Ontario Endangered Species Act for red-side dace. And then there's a variety of other regulatory exemptions which may reduce or eliminate protections for a variety of other federally listed species at risk within the project area. And then there's a heading in the letter: predicted adverse effects on core areas of federal jurisdiction. The project has the potential for direct and indirect effects arising from the exercise of federal power and authority. And then they require authorization by Fisheries and Oceans Canada under the Fisheries Act. Fish habitat. The letter says that the project would cause adverse effects on fish and fish habitat, which is federal jurisdiction, as well as aquatic species and species at risk. There was a 2018 Natural Environment Report that indicated the highway corridor study area includes numerous locations representing high-quality cold water habitat for fish, including federal species at risk such as red-side dace. And then 85 to 100 stream crossings are implicated in the preferred route. And the red-side dace is a significant species. They're an indicator species, and they eat mosquitoes. And then 75 wetlands, 28 are designated as provincially significant, would be impacted. And then with the ability to reevaluate wetlands that are already provincially significant. This is going to cause even more issues with wetland loss. There was a report from the Auditor General back in 2018, I believe, that said that like over 75% of wetlands have been lost in southern Ontario. And then they're critical to the ecological health of the Humber River, Etobicoke, and Credit River watershed. And then the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority, according to them, from this letter, the proponents' comparative evaluation of net effects and ranking of alternatives does not appear to consider the significant sensitivities or quality of all natural heritage features within the alternative routes. There's some unevaluated wetlands which might be provincially significant but have not been classified. Woodlands should be assessed so that they're on equal footing. Let's see. Oh, in terms of migratory birds, this letter says that in 4 ways there could be impacts: direct mortality, indirect mortality, habitat fragmentation, and disturbance. And then noise, artificial lights, barriers to movement, and edges associated with roads. And then those cumulative effects with the transmission line. There is a item in the environmental registry as well dealing with that. I don't think I highlighted anything else in this. Okay, so I think I'm going to go to the next article. So let's see. This one will be a news article. So this is an article from the Norwell, Ontario's Highway 413 to move ahead without federal review again. And it's by Emma McIntosh. Oh, yeah. And it was before the holiday. And then Environmental Defense, Tim Gray said, the decision is a sad commentary on both provincial and federal governments that leaves few avenues to prevent environmental destruction. And then it slices across habitats of species at risk, including the western coast frog and red-side dace. The federal government did sound alarms about the Highway 413 environmental impact. But Ontario seemed to be missing this information and a lack of intention to Indigenous consultation according to documents obtained by the Norwell, so those are freedom of information. And then Guilbeault called off the impact assessment due to constitutional challenge, instead forming a working group. But I believe that it shouldn't have been called off. Taylor Hubbard, president of the Impact Assessment Agency, would usually sign off on the decision not to go with a review. Usually it will be Stephen Guilbeault, but it was Terrence Hubbard. I mentioned that previously. Environmental Defence Tim Gray pointed to the possibility the federal government will step in to Ontario's management of red-side dace, some of the last places where the minnow can survive in Canada fall along the Highway 413 routes. But and the article says that they've already permitted development in red-side dace habitat for years, even as the species rapidly declines, so it's likely not happening. And then there's an ongoing strike by Ontario's engineers. Yeah, so I guess this would be a government document next. So we'll go there. Yeah, environmental registry item. So there is an environmental registry item for Highway 413 focus analysis area and Northwest GTA transmission corridors narrowed area of interest refinements. That is due on January 8th, 2025. For comment, and the number 019-9453. And then it's talking about transmission. So there would be impacts to the environment with this proposal. Yeah, and then I have two articles that I'll look at. Let's see. So this is an article saying Ontario to cut protections for tiny endangered fish found along the route of Highway 413 by Emma McIntosh. And it's saying that the red-side dace is an important part of the ecosystem, helping manage populations of insects like mosquitoes. So that makes sense that we would want to protect them. But other species might be in trouble if the red-side dace ends up becoming extinct or exploited. And in 2020, there was an imminent risk of the red-side dace being wiped out of the province. 2021, the Highway 413. It's saying that the federal government decided to subject Highway 413 to an impact assessment. But now it's not doing that. And then there's a quote, for the government, it's not a convenient species. The government, like Doug Ford, compared endangered species to grasshoppers. So he doesn't understand the concept of endangered species. And then in 2021, the Auditor General found that the Environment Ministry never denied a permit to harm a species at risk and grants most automatically. And it also doesn't do inspections to verify companies are following conditions on their permits. They lowered the requirements of instead of 20 years, prohibiting anyone from damaging occupied habitat or places where red-side dace have lived within the last 20 years in the environmental Ontario's Endangered Species Act. They're now changing that to 10 years would qualify, and recovery habitat would be limited to streams and waterways directly adjacent to those where the minnow have lived within the last decade, and instead of 20 years. So that's like half. There's been success breeding red-side dace in captivity, but with the article points out that species can't be reintroduced if the places where it used to live are developed or destroyed. It's not a science-based decision. And then since 2010, numbers of minnow have been cut in half, and they live mostly in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. And then scientists have been trouble getting permits from the Ontario's Environment Ministry to study the species and gather evidence showing where it might still be present. So even more, like streams that might have red-side dace might not be recorded as having red-side dace. And they might not have been included and without that data, it's becoming a huge issue. Well, it is a huge issue. Government's actually cutting in half the length of time. Oh, we've got this situation where the government, there's a quote, we've got this situation where the government's actually cutting in half the length of time when an area would be considered to be occupied. But at the same time, it's also not allowing sampling to be conducted in those areas, so we really don't know what the status is and whether the species is present or not. And let's see, it's 2025 now. So I'm just looking for my calculator. So 2025 subtract 2018. So like the government's been in power for coming up on 7 years. So and if they get reelected, hopefully not. It'll be getting close to 10 years. Yeah, so it'll be a lot of data lost. And then the article is saying that the government is also proposing to tweak protections for the butternut tree, and then those requirements to have a report about the health of the butternut tree that would be affected, but it takes 30 days, and changes would eliminate that waiting period, meaning that the ministry would have no time to review the report findings. And then there's a lack of plan to protect the butternut tree. And then there's like exemptions from mining companies. I think the butternut tree was in the Highway 413. And then I will go to the next article. This article is a tiny endangered fish lies on the path of Highway 413. Canada has a plan, but no new power to protect it. And this is by Catherine Peeman in the Narwhal. And and then the article says, website dates have been protected for more than a decade, but it isn't exactly working. Officially considered under threat for 15 years, the Committee of the Status of Species at Risk Ontario listed them as endangered in 2009, and they were added to the Species at Risk list that same year, gaining full habitat protection under the Provincial Endangered Species Act. And then federally, red side dace were assessed as endangered by the Committee of the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. And then the federal recovery strategy for red side dace prepared by Fisheries and Ocean does not state that any harm to the fish jeopardizes its survival, as the department's own assessment did in 2019. So between the original assessment and the recovery strategy, there's a change and then it doesn't reference the severe population decline. And then the strategy mentions the same proposed measures identified by the Ontario government, which are not followed or not working. The federal strategy for seeing red side dace recover are prioritized as high, medium, or low. And then it says raising fish in hatcheries is a high priority. But there will be fewer habitat with this highway being built. And then this is shocking. Red side dace prefer cool water below 20, but the recovery strategy lists a target temperature as maximum of 24 degrees Celsius. So the recovery strategy isn't adequate to recover red side dace. It's absurd. And then there was a requirement for the minister to make a decision on prohibiting the destruction of red side dace habitat by January 25th, 2025. And then Fisheries and Oceans has authorized 154 permits under the Species at Risk Act since red side dace were listed in 2017, and the species continues to decline. And then it talks about the provincial track record is 0 from this article. There's never been a permit that has been declined or denied. And then this is a shocking statement. The Ministry of Transportation obtained an overall benefit permit in 2021 for highway crossing over a creek that allowed damage and destruction of 0.46 hectares of red side dace habitat, but only required 0.08 hectares of habitat to be created or enhanced. So 0.08 is less than 0.46. I'll go to video. Yeah, so this is what these are articles about the Highway 413 and the provincial and federal decisions not to have an environmental assessment act. There was some troubling information regarding reasons why they're not engaging in an environmental assessment. There will be significant harm on endangered species at risk, and there's also a political price if the highway is supported by the federal government. Anyways, I hope that you have a good rest of your day, and I'll be back another time. Oh, and don't forget to review the environmental registry. Yeah, and I'll see you next time.